Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the SimNFL Show, real talk about fake sports. I am your host and commissioner. You can call me Pierce. Today, we are covering all of the Week 8 action of our Pro Sim over at simfba.com. If you're unfamiliar, come check us out on the website and on Discord. We would love to have you. So as usual, we're going to cover all of the stats and summaries from every Week 8 game. There were really two categories of game this week. There were a lot of really exciting, high-scoring, close games, and there were a lot of blowouts. So we're going to focus a little more on the former, but we will cover every game's result. Then we'll go into my usual players of the week and look at the current standings by conference. And then we have a special segment today where we look at the trade deadline, particularly looking at people who were either buyers or sellers. Buyers in this case meaning teams who are looking to add immediate talent, and then sellers being teams who are looking to ship off talent to get younger players or picks. So we'll look at a lot of teams that made a lot of trades right at the deadline and talk about those for a little bit. And then we will get into our preview for next week and see all the games we have coming up. So, Thursday night, we had a game between the Jets and the Saints. The Jets dominated this game with running and defense. So, both James Carter and Michael Fulmer having huge days on the ground, combining for over 300 total yards between the two backs when you count in Carter's receiving yards. And then the defense sacked Ben Rivera 9 times. So, combination of dominating on the line of scrimmage, both on offense and defense, led the Jets to a victory on Thursday night in prime time. Moving into Sunday, we had an amazing game between the Bills and the Dolphins, with Asensio and Hammonds duking it out. Dean Hammonds really letting it fly with 3 touchdowns, but also 4 interceptions. Miami jumped out to a 17-3 lead in this one. But then Buffalo started working their way back. They got a safety. Then they added a touchdown, and over the next 2.5 quarters, 3 field goals. Finally taking the lead in the fourth quarter, 18-17. But Dolphins got another drive, drove down, and with about 4 minutes to go, they got a field goal to take a 2-point lead. Asensio then went 4 for 5 for 60 yards on the Bills' next drive, leading them into the end zone to take the lead, and that was with 1:39 left. And then Hammonds had 2 long completions for 40 yards, 2 incompletions, a 12-yarder, and then a 31-yard Hail Mary on the last play of the game to give the Dolphins a 26-25 victory. Amazing back and forth. Both quarterbacks working the 2-minute offense, getting touchdowns. Dolphins got the ball last and had just enough time for the Hail Mary and the game-winning score. So Brian Adams and Kenny White, both huge games in this one. But really, it was the quarterback's day to show what they could do. Both of them showed up. And in the end, it was a dramatic victory for the Dolphins on the Hail Hammonds, as some people are calling it. We had an accidental scheme change, I think, from Baltimore going to vertical. So this one was pretty one-sided. Bengals, Jeremiah West with 252 yards and 4 touchdowns. Ravens just not able to get anything going. David Chop throwing 3 picks. And Stanley Piper losing a fumble. So dominating victory for the Bengals, with Ravens still trying to figure out that scheme. Meanwhile, the Tennessee Titans and Colts had a, surprisingly for me, close game. This is another defensive struggle. It featured 9 sacks in total, 4 of Reimer and 5 of Freitag. Tennessee actually jumped out to the early lead. They got both of their touchdowns early in the game. So by early second quarter, they were up 14-0. Indianapolis stuck around, got a touchdown in the fourth to bring it to 14-12. And then had 2 final drives, both of which got into Titans territory, one of which led to a short punt, and then the other 2 short punts from the 27 and the 38-yard line. So the Colts were not able to get that final score when they needed it, and the Titans held on to that. Stephen Bryant being the star of the game for the Titans, 79 yards rushing, and another 79 receiving on 4 catches. Meanwhile, Freitag continuing to do absolutely everything he can for the Colts. 244 yards through the air, 94 and a touchdown rushing. Ultimately wasn't able to get that last score, and the Colts dropped this one by 2. Cowboys also had a strong performance defensively, sacking Matt Howard 8 times. They jumped out to a 10-0 lead and only gave up 1 touchdown with their first-team offense before the backups came in late in the fourth. Jesse Knoll, 299 yards and 3 touchdowns. Bruno Hansen, 147 yards and a touchdown. And Stephen Othan doing everything on defense with a sack and a forced fumble and a safety recorded, all from Othan. So again, Cowboys, one of the most dangerous teams in the league, and proving it again against the Jaguars in this one. Carolina, I'm not sure if there was another scheme change here. Dakota Link only completing 4 passes for 36 yards, giving Hiram Morand and Ryan Johnson the opening they need for the Texans to come away with the upset victory. Johnson well on his way to a 3rd Pro Bowl at fullback with 205 total yards, 205 rushing yards in this one to lead the Texans to the victory there. Another amazing game between the Falcons and the Buccaneers. Jose Padilla having an amazing first start for the Falcons with 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Wayne Ricketts completing a couple of touchdowns as well. So it was Tampa Bay that got out to the early lead in this one, 12-0. Atlanta came back with 3 unanswered touchdowns to take the lead in the second half. But Tampa Bay got a tap horn touchdown and a 2-point conversion, tying it at 20 in the third quarter. What followed was an Atlanta touchdown to take the lead, 10 points from Tampa Bay, so they took the lead. An Atlanta field goal and touchdown with a 2-point conversion for them to take the lead back. Tampa Bay tied it with 5 minutes to go, so the teams tied at 37. Just going back and forth in this one. Atlanta wasn't able to take the lead from there. They had to punt, but then they got a second interception of Tap Horn, which led them to their touchdown in the final minute and ultimately the winning score. So this game featured a combined 55 second half points. So an absolutely thrilling contest in here. Padilla with his 4 touchdowns, Gregory Taphorn contributing 3 touchdowns on his own, though he did have those 2 crucial interceptions, both by Gregory Williams. So a lot to celebrate statistically. Falcons really getting a boost from their new quarterback, which in this case led to a very exciting win in the division over the Buccaneers. Broncos continue to run roughshod over the AFC. Peter London, 159 yards and 52 yards on the ground on 6 carries. Hugh Kahn contributing over 150 yards combined on 18 touches and a touchdown. Just overwhelming Rashawn Lyons and that New England defense as well. So another big victory for the Broncos as they continue in the AFC West there. Steelers and Rams, an amazing shootout. Philip Avila, 655 yards and 5 touchdowns, but they needed every single one of those to beat the Steelers. This one, by halftime, it was 28-28, and we'd already seen 3 lead changes. So right from the get-go, this was a game for the ages. It was tied at 35 in the third quarter. It was tied at 42 in the fourth quarter. I mean, for a casual fan, you really can't ask for much more than that. Robert Morris doing it all, 284 yards and 2 touchdowns, passing 68 yards and a touchdown running. Dario Tomeo, 3 touchdowns rushing. And of course on the Rams, the trio of Baldwin, Larry, and Slamba doing a lot of damage there as well. This one finally changed when the Rams were able to get a defensive stop. Stop in this case being they held the Steelers to a field goal, 45-42, and then they moved down and scored with about 5 minutes to go, taking the lead for the first time since early in the second quarter. So the Steelers were tied or had the lead for more than half the game. But the Rams ultimately took it back, and then the Steelers had 2 drives that didn't go anywhere in the end of the fourth, and the Rams were able to escape and stay undefeated. But absolutely fantastic game. Steelers scoring 45 points, but still coming up short against that amazing Rams offense. On the other side of things, this was over after the first quarter as the Browns got up 21-0 early on the Cardinals, and then coasted from there. Another 200-yard game with 3 touchdowns in this one. Addison Crosby not able to get anything going for the Cardinals, and the Browns putting up a solid 50 in the victory in this one. Similar case here. Kansas City sacked Allard 10 times, picked him off twice. Theo Scribner had a couple touchdowns. Raymond Ortiz had 3.5 sacks. So the Chiefs absolutely dominating the Seahawks in this one and coming away with a shutout victory. And then the biggest one of all, Packers 72-0 over the 49ers. Berendez 264 yards and a touchdown. Joseph Garibay threw for 4 touchdowns and 465 yards. Held Solano under 50 yards and with an interception. So absolutely no contest in this one. Packers all over it with the big victory there. Giants coming up with a big victory over the Eagles. Aaron Poole had 4 touchdowns, but also threw 3 interceptions. And Lamar Johnson, 193 yards, 2 touchdowns passing, 130 yards, 2 touchdowns rushing, to go with 2 touchdowns from John Knighton. And together, those were enough to get a victory over the Eagles. They came out strong. They led early. It was so 21-9, it looked to be right before halftime. But then in trying to get anything going before the half, Poole threw an interception. And then right before halftime, Lamar Johnson ran a 54-yard touchdown. So it actually was 28-9 by halftime. Philadelphia stuck with it. They scored twice. They closed the gap to 5 points. But Poole's last interception was in Giants territory when they were down 35-30. And then the Giants had 3 big plays in a row where they scored that final touchdown, which was the final nail in the coffin. So great offensive performance from both teams, but the Giants came away with a victory in this one on the arms and the legs of Lamar Johnson. And then finally, on Monday night, we had the Bears and the Chargers. So Gerald Lewis and Miguel Aguilera both doing it with their arms and legs. Lewis ultimately coming away with the victory in that one, supported by Pat Flexen and his 55 yards and a touchdown. So Bears were able to grind out 20 points and then hold the Chargers to a single touchdown, defense making the difference in this one as the Bears came away with the victory on Monday night. So for our players of the week, we're going to highlight Padilla in his first game with Atlanta for his 300 yards and 4 touchdowns. Amazing, mistake-free football, leading the Falcons to a big win when they needed it. Tomeo and Mora, 2 great running backs out of the AFC North with a trio of touchdowns each. And then Anthony Larry with 16 catches for 299 yards and a touchdown. Rams continuing to rewrite the record books with that offense. On the defensive side, Steven DiNardo with 2.5 sacks, Raymond Ortiz with 3.5, and then Othon with that amazing game, sack, forced fumble, and safety altogether. And then a highlight to William Owens for the Giants, who had a couple of picks in that game. So 8 great performances, 8 great players on 8 teams that we get to highlight. And again, for all that there were a lot of blowouts, there were a handful of really amazing matchups in this week that were a lot of fun to watch and really brought out the best in these players. So this is where we leave things after the week. Cincinnati, Washington, LA Rams still remaining unbeaten. In the AFC, we note the Jets sneaking up into this graphic for the first time at 3-4, but that's only a half game away from what would be the final playoff seed. Currently a tie between Buffalo and Pittsburgh, right there on the bubble. And then in the and then in the NFC, we see again that top 7 really asserting themselves. An amazing group of Dallas, Philadelphia, and Chicago, all potentially being 6-2 wild cards. So all playoff teams, 4 games above 500. and then Carolina leading the South. I think which with the Falcons and what they're doing, and we'll talk about that in a second, but that's no gimme anymore in the South. And then Detroit trying desperately to keep up with all that competition. They have a winning record at 4-3. So we know the trade deadline has since passed, but there was some amazing movement that I want to highlight here. The big story, of course, being the Falcons being big buyers at this time, and saying that a lot of that was the previous deal last week of adding Padilla and getting a quarterback to jumpstart that offense, and feeling like with his contract that window was very short, and so jumping on the opportunity. And they added 6 players of 73 overall or better. So huge additions there. Moved on from Chris Frazier and a number of other young players, as well as 5 picks in the next 2 drafts, but none of them higher than 3rd, and only one of them higher than 5th. So in the short term, I think this is a huge victory for Atlanta, adding a lot of great players. Of course, the thing is going to be, how long is that window even open for? Because a lot of these players that they added are on expiring contracts, and we know Padilla has that big ballooning contract that they agreed to take on. So how many of these players are they going to try to keep for the next 2 to 3 years? And how are they going to afford those that they do choose to keep? Is going to be an interesting thing to watch this offseason. But certainly it makes the NFC South race a little more exciting for the second half of the season with all of these big additions, particularly on the line. So 3 offensive linemen, 2 defensive linemen, and then Wade Hires at that free safety position. So huge moves from Atlanta. Excited to see how that plays out over the rest of the season. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the Bills moving on from Fred Garland and Morris Ty, and adding a lot of youth in the form of guys like Chandler McKay and Sammy Langford, guys that are just starting to realize their potential in the NFL. And then we have a shuffling of some lower picks as well as a 4th rounder 2 years out being added. So Bills certainly looking to get younger and moving on from some older veterans. We'll see how that affects them. Again, they're right on that playoff bubble right now at 4-4. So we will see how that starts to shake out in the next couple of weeks. But certainly, so not selling out entirely, but moving on from a couple of veterans, looking to get younger, looking to add a little bit of future draft capital. Denver Broncos can always be counted on to be making some moves. They did a guard swap, letting Sharkey out, and then adding Naylor at a steep cost, though, giving up that 1st-round pick in next year's draft. Moving on for some younger players as well to add Fred Garland and a couple of low picks. So a guard swap and a big addition in Garland, but a big price tag on that. We will see how that sets them up for the future, and with the few assets that they have now going into 25. And with a couple of big, I think, free agents still needing to be paid in the offseason. Texans, I think, were the biggest acquirers of draft capital. So they moved on from 3 veterans, George Boone, Todd Brumlow, and James Kiger, adding 3 young players, and then 2nd and 3rd and 4th in the next draft, and then a 3rd the year after. So some serious capital being added for the Texans. Moving on from those 3 veterans, definitely shoring up draft capital to start building a team around Morand. So interesting to see what they do with all that capital. We've seen from the Carolina model that can work if you really do your work on the draft side and knock that out of the park. So Texans will definitely be a team to watch on the 2025 draft with all those extra picks. Vikings also adding some draft capital, adding in Frazier, George Boone, Kenneth Hankins, and a trio of picks, including a couple 3rds in the next round. Moving on from a number of veterans as well, including Charles C.A. at offensive tackle and Paul Mumford at defensive end. So big moves from the Vikings, bringing in Frazier and sending out a lot of talent, and adding some draft capital to build around him. So it definitely seems like more of a working toward the future mold with a young quarterback and a number of additional draft picks. And of course, the Commanders are going to be mixing it up when trades are out there. So the guard swap that they did with Denver, adding Sharkey, moving on from Naylor, but being able to add that first round pick in next year. They also have limited capital, so that's a big addition for them. And then shuffling around some 2026 picks as well, losing a second but adding a fourth and a seventh, and adding Kiger as well and CA on the line, while dropping off Ludi. So that's dropping a scheme malice and adding a scheme fit on the defensive line. And then moving on from some younger players as well in the rookie Lauer and Arredondo. So a lot of addition, Washington trying to stretch out that window as much as they can, getting a scheme fit and then adding a first-round pick to their limited draft capital. So that's going to be a big addition. Even if it's a late first-rounder, that's a huge change in the draft landscape for them. So we'll get to see what they do with that, if they get to pick a first-rounder this year, or if they have more machinations to come in the off-season. But this is where they stand for now after the trade deadline. So yeah, lots of movement, lots of exciting changes. Be interesting to see in the coming weeks who rises and falls as a result of all those moves. And in Week 9, we have an exciting slate. Washington is going to play on Thursday night. They're going to go to Indianapolis to face the Colts. And then starting on Sunday, we get the Giants at Carolina. Giants coming off that big victory over the Eagles. Carolina trying to hold on to their spot as division leader in the South. And Atlanta looking to pressure Carolina, going to East Rutherford to face the Jets. And that great rushing attack. In the afternoon, we get to see Kansas City go to LA to face the Chargers, a couple of 3-5 teams in the West. And then Denver is at Detroit. So a great cross-conference matchup there in the afternoon. The Sunday night game this week is Vegas at Tennessee. Tennessee sneaking away with that victory. So they get to face Vegas off a bye. And that great passing offense should be a great one. And then Monday night, we have a real thrill. This could be a Super Bowl preview as far as I'm concerned. Undefeated Cincinnati at undefeated LA Rams. So the top teams in both conferences facing off. We'll get to see who comes out better in that one. The Rams have home field advantage, so that could be the deciding factor. But Cincinnati with that great balanced offense, now with an extra running back, and then the Rams with that amazing passing attack will go head-to-head, and we'll get to see who remains undefeated after that game. It's going to be awesome, and I can't wait to see it. So that is it for this edition of the SimNFL show. There will not be a show next week as I will be on vacation with my family. So we will be off for a week, but then we will hopefully be back for the Week 10 recap, and we will pick things up weekly from there. But otherwise, everyone have a great week of football. Good luck, and have fun.